Hi guys, it's David here from Right On Resources, and today we're going to have a look at a quick video looking at some of the best techniques and methods to succeed in creative writing. So maybe you just want to improve your creative writing, maybe you're in year 11 and you're about to do your GCSEs, and this would be a really good way just to hone in those skills and to make a bit of improvement. For the GCSE English language qualification, you'll be assessed in the following areas. So one of the biggest components we'll look at is content and organisation. So this is worth 24 marks, and it will cover things like language techniques and structural techniques that you will use to make your writing seem more engaging to the reader. The other part of it is technical accuracy. Now this is one that is largely overlooked by a lot of learners, and that is because it's all about your spelling, your grammar and your punctuation. A lot of the time when we're in an exam, people rush through this stage. They don't really go back and check it all that often, and that is a real easy way for people to miss out on some marks. Now your creative writing question covers a massive 40 marks for this exam paper, and that's actually 50% of the whole exam paper in total. So it's really important that you come back and revise your creative writing, and really try to make sure that you're honing in on those skills to get the best mark possible. One of the biggest things to stress with this question is that it should be quality over quantity. So examiners aren't looking for a complete story. No one is expecting you to be able to get a full beginning, middle and end in the amount of time you're allowed to do this in the exam. What we are looking for is your ability to write confidently and coherently and use those techniques that you've been learning during your English course. If you're able to do that, what you want to aim to do is write anywhere between 5 to 6 paragraphs for your creative writing, and that should be more than enough to get a decent mark for this exam. One of the biggest things that the examiners are looking out for in your exam response are the language techniques that you're using to make your writing more engaging. This can commonly be broken down into the following acronym, so we often call it Go Massive, and those will stand for a number of different techniques that will help improve your writing. So you might have looked at a few of these before, but if you're not too sure, by all means take a note of them or screenshot or write them down, whatever works for you, to make sure you're aware of these and you include them in your own writing. So we have a group of three, which is the collection of 3 words or phrases used together, often to cause extra emphasis to a point. The example would be, the water was cold, deadly, and caused goosebumps to break out on his flesh. So you can see there, it's very similar to things like alliteration, and often we get that mixed up, but they are quite different as well. So rather than having the same letter repeated, it's 3 adjectives or 3 words or even a phrase as well that will help work towards a common description. So the water was cold, it was deadly, and caused goosebumps. And there we have our 3 kind of things helping us to imagine just how deadly and dangerous it is with this water. The second one, onomatopoeia. So these are just very simply words that sound like the noise that they make, and you can see there a number of different examples on the side as well. Now a metaphor, this is one that we all should know, but we often get it confused with a simile. So before you move on, make sure that you have it firmly in your mind the difference between these 2 techniques, as not only does it help you in your creative writing, but it also helps you when you're actually answering a question relating to English language as well. Okay, we have further techniques, so those can be broken down as alliteration, sensory language, and simile. Now, a lot of these we should already be aware of. If not, it's a good idea just to revisit these and make sure that they're the kind of things that you use consistently within your writing. The more techniques you use, generally speaking, the more marks you're going to get within the exam. Okay, and the final ones now. We have imagery, so using visually descriptive or figurative language. Verbs, which hopefully we all should be aware of those, that words that convey an action, and emotive language. A lot of the time people struggle with this last one, emotive language. They think it might be things like love and hate, but really it's actually words that invoke an emotional reaction from the reader. So if you can look at the example there, we've got words like abused and neglected, which are very powerful, very negative words that would have quite a big impact on the reader as they took those words in. So when it comes to the exam, you'd typically be given an image, which we also call a stimulus when we're talking about creative writing. You'll normally get a question such as this: write the opening of a story based on this image. Now this can be quite tricky because it depends on the image. Sometimes it's one that you might find really helpful and one that can really help you engage with the creativity side of this question, but sometimes you're left with a picture that isn't the best. Regardless of whatever the picture is, you should make sure that your response includes these following things. So use a range of Go Massive techniques. Now when we say a range, I realise that that's quite a vague term, but we mean think about using at least 5 or 6 of those in the whole of your response, and that should make sure that you're at least meeting that area of the mark scheme for the examiner. Writing clear, coherent paragraphs. So again, a lot of the time, people hurry up and they just rush and they're desperate to get the pen on paper, and a lot of the time it just doesn't quite make sense. So that happens because sometimes the thoughts in our head just doesn't quite transition onto the page. So make sure you're taking your time, try and be nice and calm, and just make sure that what you're writing is clear and that people can understand what you're trying to say. Use a variety of punctuation techniques. Now, if you're unsure about your punctuation, don't worry about it too much at this point. I will do a further video helping to look at some of the more sophisticated range of punctuation that will help you get high marks in the exam. And the last one, think carefully about the vocabulary you use. So you can get quite a few marks for using a range of sophisticated vocabulary. It's really good just to show your range of understanding of some really key kind of language terms and really good techniques to use in your writing. So now I'm going to give you an example response. You can use this response if you want to help your own writing, or you can just use it to see how those techniques can be used to help get us a good mark. Now I'm not necessarily expecting you guys to be at this level as of yet, but just have a look through the example and see what you think about it. See if it actually works as a piece of creative writing. See if it uses some of those techniques that we mentioned earlier on. So it says, the roar of the waves engulfed Tom's senses. Timidly he crept closer. The spray from the water merged with the sweat upon his brow, making his skin look waxy and pale. From the shore Holly looked as though she was a million miles away. He couldn't lose his courage now. The force of the waves smashed into the rocks below as he took a step closer. Tom forced his lungs to take in as much air as possible as he prepared to dive into the dark depths of the water. So what I want you to think about, and if you want to pause the video here, you're more than welcome to do so. Think about whether this writing was engaging, does it follow the kind of criteria that we were going through, and see if you can identify any of the techniques that have been used to make this writing effective. Again, if you want to pause the video, that's fine, and we'll now go on to have a look at the actual techniques that have been used in this example. So hopefully you had a look at that by yourself. You're able to pause it and have a little bit of a scan through to see what kind of techniques were available. So if we have a look at it together then, we've got our first paragraph there. The first thing I would underline or identify is this word roar, and that is quite an effective verb really. It's quite an interesting one. So it actually sounds quite animalistic. It's kind of making the waves seem like they're alive, so it's borderline personification as well. So the roar of the waves engulfed Tom's senses, so it gives me a real sense of the power and the volume of these waves. Timidly, he crept closer. So if you think back to the Go Massive techniques in the table that we looked at earlier, you've got that CC repetition, which of course would mean that the writer has used alliteration. Now if we move on to the second paragraph, from the shore Holly looked as though she was a million miles away. So there's actually two techniques in this one here. Because we've used the simile there and we've used the word like, we'd have to say that the technique has been used as a simile. It's comparing it to a larger distance than she actually is away from our main character. And then further on in the sentence, we've got the million miles, emphasizing just how far Holly is away from our main character, which would be an example of alliteration. We've also got this interesting verb here. It's quite aggressive really, the smashed into the rocks. And this really gives us a sense of the force and the power of the water, which would help create a real strong impression on the reader. We look at our final paragraph then. Tom forced his lungs to take in as much air as possible. So again, forced is very aggressive verb. And you think about all these types of verbs that have been used. You've got an aggressive verb there with forced. You've got one with smashed and raw. All of these verbs kind of work together to create what we call a semantic field. So it means a group of words that have a similar thing in common, and it all adds to the tone and the atmosphere of the writing. The very final one that I'm going to point out here is dark depths, and we have alliteration. Now, as an example, this isn't too bad. However, if this was the only thing I was to give the examiner, it might not necessarily get me the most marks. And the only reason because of this is because a lot of the techniques that are used are very similar to each other. There are 3 examples of alliteration. You can see that in the first, second, and even the third paragraph. So in every single paragraph, there's alliteration. So when you're actually doing your own response, you want to make sure that you're trying to use a variety of techniques so that you can demonstrate to the examiner that you know how to use more than the ones that are present on the screen right now. If you would like to have a go at some creative writing, there are 3 different images here that you could have a go at. If you want to carry on and do a similar response to the example that you saw on the previous slide, then that one's available for you. And I've included 2 other images that might be helpful as writing prompts as well. If you do attempt your creative writing, just remember to include the same things that we went over first of all to make sure that your writing is engaging. So again, just to refresh, use a range of Go Massive techniques, write in clear, coherent paragraphs, use a variety of punctuation techniques, and think carefully about the vocabulary you use. Now, there are a lot of things you need to think about when doing your creative writing, and the simple solution is to get some practice. You don't have to write 5 paragraphs or 6 paragraphs every single time. Just keep it small, practice, and go back and review. Writing takes a long time to develop. It isn't something that should be rushed. It should be something that takes time. It should be something that you care about, and it should be something that you go back and review to see if you're actually improving. If you need any extra help or support, then please feel free to leave a comment or subscribe for more content. New videos will be added every single week, so keep looking for updates because there will be more content available to you shortly.